Memory transcription subject, Captain Sovlin, United Nations Fleet Command. Date, Standardized Human Time, March 24, 2137. The crewed vessels of the Terran fleet advanced on Kato, where the unlikely Commonwealth Dominion alliance waited. On a separate course, UN drones and Yodel technocracy ships were flushing the Shadow fleet out from the system's asteroid belt. Their band had been saddled with Ilthus, since their particle beams allowed them to match his aggression. I was hopeful that the Chief Hunter's ships would fall over the course of the battle, even if humanity didn't believe that was the ideal outcome. However, the 50,000 Duertan shield vessels surging ahead toward the rocky world, which was somewhat similar in use to Sol's Mars, as I understood it, could be a problem too. The Avians couldn't afford to throw away their numbers, both for our sake and Kalqua's. We were a seed's flight away from Alpha, after soaring through the moderate resistance near the gas giants. More vessels were amassed by Kato, but the bulk of the enemy fleet was anticipating our eventual arrival at the Kolshan homeworld. Their hope was to whittle us down along the way, despite how that knocked tens of thousands of ships from their 500,000-strong tally. The Terrans needed a full docket of information for the upcoming engagement, to stave off any traps or devious intentions. I surveyed the shield with interest, trying to gauge what their strategy would be for engaging the hostiles. With their hulls packed into our ranks, it was then that I noticed a strange anomaly on the nearest scans. "I've noticed something unusual about these vessels, compared to the standard Duertan make," I piped up. "It's as if they've stapled some mix-and-match storage bays to the bottom of their ships. High amounts of mass concentration there too." Anso tilted his head. Were they trying to turn standard warships into bombers? The mass distribution is congruent with what I'd expect for a few standard antimatter missiles, typically used in extermination fleets. Samantha's eyes narrowed. Like the extermination fleet that came to Earth. Or to Kalqua, even if they didn't go by that moniker. I will note that there's some variance between crocodile technology seen on Earth, the multi-tube bombers specialized to Colony Foundation, and the Duertan's rather antiquated technology. The blast radius of their bombs is limited by how inefficient the subatomic collision mechanisms. I jabbed my claws at the Yodel. You don't need to hijack my observations by regurgitating science textbooks. Stop trying to prove your intelligence through rote memorization. I'm providing insight into the destructive capacity of different species' weapons technologies. Ralki forbid I find it interesting. Here's some fucking insight. Any antimatter bomb can flatten a city, but the Duertan's warheads don't have quite the same reach as others when they blow up. Isn't that simpler? Simpler isn't always better, Sovlin. You just don't want a primitive to know anything more than you. If I was a human, you'd gush about my intelligence. Well, who'd expect a predator to behave that way? The bar is lower for them. No offense. Humans just tend to have very specific interests, like how Tyler likes murdering fish and shooting things in simulated games. Tyler scowled at me. I have other interests. Sorry that I can't gush about philosophy and zoology like Marcel. You two need to quit your bickering, especially at a time like this, and conduct yourself with proper discipline. Am I understood? Yes, sir, I grumbled, as the Yodel said nothing. I think you caught the point buried in there. Despite his excessive information, Anso is right about the Duertan strapping themselves with as many Rushad bombs as they could. Carlos' brown irises darkened. Do you think they intend to bomb Alpha, sir? I think so. I also don't see how humanity could stop them without throwing ourselves into the Kolshan's tentacles, so we should cross that bridge if we get there. For all we know, the shield flounders and panics at Kato, Tyler answered. I chewed at my claws. But you said you thought they'd fight better because of their desperation, sir. I said they might. I don't think it does any fucking good to raise tensions before we even get to Alpha, because after seeing they taped bombs to their bellies, I'm certain they're off their rockers with rage. Our orders are to destroy enemies posted in this area, focus on that. If the humans didn't want to address the Duertans' vindictive plans, then I was content not to dwell on the prospect of bombs. While the thought of innocents like Riesel getting caught in the crossfire hounded me, the personal resentment in my heart yearned for the Kolshians to suffer, as we all had. Our lives meant nothing to them, so my sympathy was a bit strained. The Yodel would be able to ignore the looming problem as well, given that his opinion was in favor of glassing Offa. What was Onso going to do? Beg the Terrans to stop the shield from completing his desired course of action? What we need is for the Duertan to carry their weight in combat. The United Nations doesn't endorse or crave genocide, but I can't imagine they'd be sacrificing human lives to protect Offa. Kato's cratered surface was becoming more detailed on the viewport, with a few artificial lights enlarging where HAB modules had been installed. The settlements on its surface were cramped structures packed beneath a translucent dome, relying heavily on electrolysis of recycled water to create oxygen. I could read up on such topics, just like Onso. The Dominion and Commonwealth hadn't struck defensive positions tailored toward protecting Kato's orbital range, due to the negligible collateral on the surface. Both entities had a blatant disregard for sapient lives, so I suppose they deserved each other. More concerning was the fact that we barely had a numerical edge over their 60-odd thousand encampment. Few manned ships remained in operation for the Terrans, so the bulk of our advance was the 50,000 Duertan arrivals and sapient coalition survivors. There weren't enough of us to keep the shield in check, even if we were meant to babysit them. It was a small relief that the Duertan weren't charging in blind, like Ilthus had. That said, at least there was a guarantee with Arxer ships present that the birds could deal some damage in the attack. The coalition and our revenge-seeking allies were huddling together, thronging toward the hostiles in a massive group. I wasn't sure what the Avians were doing, but I still was worried about how the Terrans would handle an assault against civilians. Months ago, I could have never imagined that my main concern, standing among a human crew, would be that their mercy would cause quarrels with other powers. Well, that doesn't look like any bombing formation I've ever seen. If this is a practice run for bombing Offa, you'd think they'd be more spread out, I grumbled. Tyler crossed his arms, inspecting the viewport. The Sapient Coalition has tipped us off that they plan to mob certain ships, as one big cluster. To me, it looks more like a clusterfuck, Samantha chimed in. I'm inclined to think the same. They were using plenty words related to herds or herbivores too. I don't know what the Duertan fed the SC, but they lapped it up. What kind of military strategy is this? Do you have any idea, Sovlin? Realization pinged at the recesses of my memory, triggered by those keywords. Were the Duertan trying to employ prey strategies from nature against predator warships? I combed my brain for hunting safeguards in ancient Gojit history, which they taught about in evolutionary science class. The obvious factor for us was the spines, but the shield hadn't taped any bristles to their craft. Somehow, I doubted the efficacy of that defense mechanism when the beastly bite was from white-hot plasma rather than teeth. This ploy seemed to center around safety in numbers, relying on the herd for protection. I think this is an attempt at communal defense. I posited with uncertainty. It's not unheard of for herd animals to team up against predators. Also, clumping together as a herd makes it difficult for the predator to target any one prey creature. Tyler groaned. It also makes evasion impossible when your fleet is a giant target. Onso squinted at his sensor readout. Swarming might be the only way they can get kills in a calculated way. You saw how the Sapient Coalition performed as a proper military. At the very least, it won't be any strategy our enemy is expecting from us, so it could surprise them. Like we did with Ilthus, we can use our ships to distract the Kolshian Arxer team. I don't think just shooting at the enemy will be enough to distract them from the giant ball of incoming ships, Carlos pointed out. That's why you humans need to pull one of your crazy stunts. Like moving another miles-wide moon? Onso, that requires a ton of planning, and days-long acceleration in subspace. I know, but my point is I'm sure you can repurpose something as a distraction. What do you expect them to do, materialize an asteroid belt around Kato? I hissed. Officer Cardona's icy eyes lit up with sinister delight. This distinct snarl was an expression that played on a human's face when they had a diabolical idea, a wry proclamation of mischief. Nothing that would benefit an enemy's welfare ever followed from that predatory marker. It usually indicated that a Terran had dreamt up some novel way of killing or disrupting the natural order. For all their noble sensibilities, that was the expression of cruelty that lurked within them, perhaps even the bloodlust they didn't believe they had. I shuddered to fathom what Tyler's latest idea might be, and felt my spines bristle from the elated malice radiating from his binocular gaze. It's been a long time since humans triggered my instincts, even during combat or when they're killing others. Somehow, right now, I sense that it's justified to fear their creative capacity within the field of death. So the Duerden want to swarm the enemy? I think we can do that one better, the sandy-haired officer chuckled. Nano-drones. We still have plenty of them. Anso's eyes also gleamed, unafraid of the scheming human. Instead of using them as tiny impacts, where they're unable to be shot down, we fashion them into locusts. Bingo. Despite the fact that I was at a loss, Samantha and Carlos both seemed to catch on to what the exchange pair were talking about. Officer Cardona stepped over to Captain Monahan, passing along his idea in hushed tones. I tried not to sulk that the nerdy marsupial always understood the predators much better than me, a veteran starship captain who was supposed to be a brilliant strategist. What had the Yodel exchange program been like? If Anso was a proper indicator, their response to military innovations seemed to be, wow, cool. Weapons are awesome. We should play with these killing machines for our ships too. My attention turned to the viewport, not wanting to express my inadequacy by asking for more details. All I'd grasped was that the Terrans found a new use for their nano-drones, aside from the standard death by 1,000 scratches. Given that Tyler selected the word swarm, I imagined he had a larger-scale plan for them. Hopefully, the Duerden wouldn't be rubbed the wrong way by us springboarding off their idea with a better version. It would take the onus off them. Depending how successful this distraction was, human distractions tended to morph into the main event, as an impetus toward chaos. According to my sensor contacts, the primate vessels were unloading their nano-drones and pooling them into a giant clump. All it took was a contribution of about 100 microscopic robots from each of our 10,000-odd ships to cook up a monstrosity. The swarm looked like a dust storm in the void, a primordial-looking blob that challenged all notions of size and scale. There wasn't a crew in the galaxy that was trained for 1,000,000 tiny dots descending on them as one. This tactic had the downside of making it possible to target the nano-drones with conventional weapons. The Arxer and the Kolshians wasted no time lobbing plasma, bullets, missiles, and anything else they had in stock at our distraction. Well, they certainly seemed distracted, I commented. The wicked grin hadn't left Tyler's face. It hasn't even started raining nano-drones over by Kato yet. We'll have enough striking their hulls at once to rack up some kills. The Duerden's herd formation wasn't attracting much fire, allowing them to move forward with their group attack. Terran manned vessels pressed ahead alongside the Avians, but kept our distance from their single cluster. Our plasma guns were charged, and Captain Monahan was waiting only to draw within range to give the order to fire. The Kolshians and Arxer were preoccupied with the tiny specks zipping toward them. The nano-drones could gather significant velocity in a short time frame, due to their insignificant mass. Our foes couldn't cut down enough of our swarm, and there were mere seconds until its impact. Every time I think that humans are normal people, and don't have any particular propensity to evilness, they conjure up something like this. Something that nobody else in the galaxy has ever heard, or even thought of. I trusted humanity to utilize their creations for good, but I was suddenly very grateful for that empathy which might drive a wedge between us and the Duerden shield. This latest plot exemplified how dangerous they were when their hunting prowess was allowed to flourish. Shivers ran down my spine as nanodrones struck home, in quantities that defied imagination. An assortment of holes blossomed on enemy vessels along their entire length, with our robots hammering drive compartments through brute force. Explosions besieged the Kolchenarxer line, as shielding and plating were both helpless against an attack of this magnitude. While the nanodrones were continuing to pelt them from all sides, encircling and swallowing the enemy whole, we took the opportunity to deploy shield-breaking missiles. This softened the defenders up even further for the Duerden shield, whose herd moseyed ahead to mob small segments of remaining hostiles. Humanity targeted foes away from our allies' line of sight, picking off any dazed opponents with plasma. The numbers of Kato's garrison had taken a significant hit from the nanodrone swarm, and a second wave of attack was on them without a moment given for recovery. It was a brutal trouncing, even as they tried to fight back in desperation. The panic among the enemy formation wasn't just in the pre-crewed Commonwealth vessels, even the Dominion's order had disintegrated with 1,000,000 mites of dust pummeling their craft. The Kolchens and the Arxer didn't team up with each other well to begin with, so the result was predictable. We were facing isolated survivors, hurling munitions at us and the Duerden in a blind frenzy. The shield sustained several hits due to their strategy of flocking together, which had made them an unmissable target. That persuaded the hostiles to concentrate munitions on the herd rather than us. The nanodrone swarm inflicted a catastrophic amount of casualties, Onso remarked. Formation outside of Kato is dwindling rapidly, down to a few thousand. The enemy appears to be targeting the shield primarily, by virtue of taking out as many ships as possible. The Duerden could mitigate their losses, except some vessels seemed disinterested in targeting the last enemies. Tyler pointed to a Duerden breakaway sect on the viewport, and his scowl intensified as the yodel zoomed in on the movement. Shit, they're moving toward the planet. I don't exactly see any new hostiles coming up from the surface. Terran manned vessels zipped closer to expedite the cleanup of the last few hostiles, but our sensor station was entranced by the Duerden's erratic behavior. Homogeneity ships had made a beeline toward Kato, breaching orbital range with as much speed as they could. I flinched as their plasma guns revved to life, cutting down a lone evacuation transport. It made sense that most Kolchens stayed put, since they assumed humanity would ignore the colony in favor of Alpha. However, from what I'd guessed the Aviant's wishes to be, that was a grave error of judgment. Gasps of horror sounded from the predators across the bridge, as the Duerden unloaded antimatter bombs without hesitation. Where there otherwise would have been celebration as we cut down the last enemy ships in the area, there was instead a somber silence. The wait for the inevitable felt both long and short, as warheads hurtled toward each settlement on the colony. Orange flashes popped atop the surface as beacons of artificial light, though when the radiance died down, Kato's electrical glow did not return. The importance of the colony clearly hadn't mattered to the shield, as much as the fact that there were any Kolchens living down there. The Duerden homogeneity had broken off for a hot-headed action of their choosing, not even waiting to secure orbital victory to move on to bombing the civilians. The Aviants had snuffed out every settlement they could spot on Kato. If that didn't make their intentions for Alpha clear, I didn't know what would. Our plans were also set in stone, pledging to displace the Commonwealth government and bring their homeworld under our control, alive. My crewmates had stated that we needed the shield's numbers, and couldn't afford to clash with them due to our conflicting ideas of justice. Where each side stood and what was at stake was as unambiguous as the result of the Battle of Kato. The question was what humanity would do about the murderous atrocity their allies had just committed. Memory transcription subject, Ambassador Tarva of the Venlil Republic. Date, Standardized Human Time, March 24, 2137. The first meeting of the Sapient Coalition was in the past, but now more than ever, my sights were set on the future. Humanity's assortment of allies had been very receptive to the idea of fixing the Venlil's hindrances, since in our case, it had nothing to do with us not being herbivores, it was about us not being meek, deformed herbivores that followed the Federation's guidance. Noah and I returned to Skalga with a new lease on life. A week from today's date, I was set to be the first Venlil to have my gene tampering reversed. It would be televised through a press conference, which Governor Veln insisted on being a part of for optics. My summons to the governor's mansion had mainly been to brief our leader on what happened during the convention, but Veln saved the topic of today's referendum for last. Veln flicked his ears placidly. Thank you both for coming to fill me in. I made sure to expedite a planet-wide vote on the planet's name. As promised, I'll abide by the results, regardless of my distaste for Skalga. I'd also prefer not to keep Venlil Prime around, so the options were Skalga versus other or stay the same. It'll be wonderful to shed another part of the Federation's influence. That was our point of mutual agreement, I replied. I was planning on submitting my vote online, as soon as we're done here. Don't worry, I won't keep you long. Noah, I can see your feet blatantly pointing toward the door. A sign of where you wish to be? The astronaut grimaced. Do I have to answer that? No, but may I remind you, I didn't ask you to come. When Tarva brought you, I let you tag along as a sign of goodwill toward your people. I'd say I'd prefer to talk to my SC ambassador without a foreign government's agent in the room, but I imagine she'll tell you everything anyway. For your information, I can keep my work separate, especially when Venlil interests are involved, I hissed. Noah wouldn't say anything that wasn't meant for UN ears, though, he's honorable. A dark emotion flickered in Veln's pupils, and he hesitated. I must ask, how in the stars did you keep the humans at bay, Tarva? Insight would be accepted from Noah at this point. They have ways of being persuasive, by coercing people to do what they want. Trapping you with your own words, finding every loophole and technicality in the law. Is that why you went along with everything they said? Was I wrong about your motives? That doesn't sound anything like the Terrans. Oh, that sounds everything like us, love, Noah growled, a low chuckle rumbling in his throat. Our diplomats are quite skilled at protecting our interests. I understand what you're capable of, and what you can do when threatened. But contrary to what Veln thinks, we disagreed on plenty. I never felt pressured to do anything I didn't want to. Because you care about us, and we care about you. Everyone at the UN knew you had humanity's back, so we had yours. We knew you wanted what was best for us, for Venlil, and for the entire galaxy. That was the one issue we had to agree on. It's really that simple. Veln over there wants to play hardball and trade favors, so he's asking for an entirely different relationship between us. The governor narrowed his eyes. I'm trying not to ice humanity out. Venlil are my top priority, but I don't mean any active harm to you. If you watch out for the Venlil first, then the UN will elevate human interests above yours. Tarva considered us as much as Venlil, just as we considered you on the same level as us. It's up to you what relationship you want with Earth, Veln, but the way you're operating now won't merit true brotherhood. We are fiercely loyal, but we also give what we get. I think you know that's fair. What I know is that I want us to be independent, and I don't want anything dictated to us from outside our borders. It's not personal, it's just business. I stood from my chair, grabbing Noah's hand. It was always personal to me and them. Humans are sweet, but they're not pushovers. What you told them was you didn't want your talks to be personal, so they've taken emotion out of their decisions. It is just business now, I don't see the issue. The problem is their tactics are downright predatory, Tarva. They're ruthless and manipulative. Then you're perfect for each other. And Veln, don't ask my advice unless you want to know how to start treating the Terrans as friends again. Like I said, their welfare is personal to me. Let's go, Noah. My human was trying not to laugh at the outraged look on the governor's face. I suppose it could be viewed as audacity, that I'd spoken to Veln in that manner, but ousting me as ambassador would sour his political points. There was some curiosity in my mind about what humanity had done that the shifty Venlil found predatory. Still, It was enough to know that the United Nations was well equipped to handle his self-centered schemes. I had noticed some major modifications on the visor law released to the public. My mind also harkened back to how Elias Meyer had warned me about certain elements of his own government being snakes in the grass, which Noah agreed with. Governor Velln invited out a side of humanity they'd been keeping away from us. With legislation being targeted at their species, it's self-defense. Noah allowed himself to smirk once we reached our vehicle. It was funny, but I'd advise not antagonizing Velln going forward. You're not going to be able to get any favors from him if you make an enemy of him. You haven't exactly welcomed Velln with open arms, and you made sure he knew you can't stand him, I protested. I was never that forthright, Tarva. You basically called him predatory. I'm pretty sure that's the worst insult in your culture. Only after Velln used it against humanity. That Venlil should not think himself above you. I know, but I know how important it is to you to have breathing room with the sapient coalition. You don't want Velln to put you on a short leash, forgive the predatory metaphor. I flicked my ears in acknowledgement, digesting his point. Governor Velln had been willing to take some of my ideas under advisement, and he'd thrown his full support behind certain initiatives that mattered to me. The gene edit reversal and the Skalga referendum were genuine positives that had sprouted from his rule, while there was little to gain from turning my successor into an enemy. Noah watched with curious eyes as I pulled out my holopad, eager to see our voting process in action. I completed a double retinal scan, authenticated my conscious decision to vote through a code sent to my email, and scanned my ID card in front of the camera. The two options, Skalga and other/stay the same, showed as buttons in large font. I tapped Skalga, clicked a checkbox to confirm my choice, and submitted the ballot after pressing yes when asked if I intended to pass along the results. Noah smiled as I snuggled up to him, before prying the holopad from my grasp. The predator searched up the exit polls, and his teeth flashed vibrantly as he turned the screen around to face me. Overwhelming public sentiment was in favor of retaking our ancestral name, with over 75% of those surveyed being Skalga supporters. Velln's attempts to dissuade the populace from bringing back the name the Federation stole from us failed. Though it wasn't a certain guarantee, it gave me the assurance that one of my initiatives had been taken to heart. Our child is going to grow up on Skalga, able to run, jump, and smell. They'll be free of the instincts that have held us back too, if I have my way. Noah's eyes fluttered over to me. What do you say, before the SC meeting next week, we finally take that vacation to Earth? We haven't been able to go through with it for so long. I'd love to see where you grew up. After all, I want to make sure our child is familiar with Earth. We'll be spending plenty of time on human soil, as a family, I purred. You're really excited about that, Step, aren't you? I've been thinking about it too. Settling down and having kids just wasn't ever in the cards for me. Exploring the universe was my calling, and that ruled out what might have been. The fact that we found extraterrestrials, it was like reaching the finish line of a race I thought I just started. It was the culmination of my dreams. If you're not excited about the idea of children, Noah, you don't have to pretend for me. It's okay. Your feelings are important too, and I don't want you to be unhappy in silence out of kindness. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just explaining that it's the first time I thought about this, and I have no idea what to do raising a kid from a different species, no less. You, meanwhile, have experience with parenting and have ideas about how you want to raise the little fella. I'm not sure I can contribute or be as prepared for it as you. It's a huge responsibility, and the more I think about it, the more I know it. You're overwhelmed by the prospect. Well, yeah. I had an amazing dad, and I want to be just like him. I'm not worried that I have the wrong temperament or anything, but I don't want to undersell the work and commitment it'll take from us both. The fact that it'll be a massive undertaking as is, it's why I'm worried to suggest the idea I can't get out of my head. Breathe. We're going to figure out what's best for us both, and it'll be okay. What's your idea? It might be too much to ask. I don't want to spoil your vision. Noah, I sprung on you that I'm getting experimental gene mods and looking to have a kid with zero warning. I think we've already crossed too much to ask. The human's hands were trembling from nerves, and I gently coiled my tail around his wrist to calm him down. Our conversation back at the Sapient Coalition meeting had been harrowing from my side, so if Noah was addressing a topic of that magnitude for our personal lives, I could understand his apprehension. He was worried about putting our relationship on the rocks or scaring me off. I gently cupped his chin with my paw, giving him my best look of affection. Whatever change he felt compelled to suggest to our plans, I was willing to listen. Both of us were from different cultures and lives, so we could handle opinion schisms in a mature way. Maybe Noah's not ready for the responsibility quite yet, he sounds stressed. We're not getting younger, but I could wait a few years if it'll make it more palatable for him to ease into. I want to do this together. The astronaut drew a shaky breath. Obviously, I'm not capable of giving birth, but what if we adopted a human child? Oh. My voice came out flat, as I tried to keep my emotions from spilling over. The thought of splitting up with Noah cut me like a knife, but a difference in interests that severe would be difficult to overcome. I understand if raising a Venlil is not right for you, but the entire reason I wanted this was about having a child that can live the life I'll never have. I can't give that up, even for you. No. I'm not saying not to have the Venlil child, at all. I'm sorry for being unclear. I'm talking about raising a human child, alongside our little fluff ball, raising them together. It's an added responsibility, I know, but I found the idea really beautiful. A family that bridges the species gap. It was my turn to be taken off guard by Noah's suggestion toward our plans, though I didn't feel averse to the idea. I could imagine a little primate and a tiny Venlil running around in the park, laughing as one big family. Of course, I had no idea what was needed to raise a human, but I suppose that put me in the same boat as my partner. He was clueless what went into rearing one of my species' younglings. Having helpless sapients that were dependent on us to survive would mean we could learn about the other's kind at a fundamental level. Calling a predator my own child, caring and loving them just as my astronaut would love a Venlil, felt right. It was a daunting challenge for us both, yet I couldn't agree with the heartwarming idea fast enough. That sounds like a wonderful idea, Noah, I replied. Raising a human and a Venlil alongside each other, as siblings? I'll love our little Earthborn. I don't think I can call them a goober. Can you suggest an adorable nickname? The Terran's pearly fangs showed with a radiant smile. You could call them a goober. But why go for that when you can say, our little vicious predator? Ah, yes. Humanity, the vicious species whose first contact with the Zeruleans, was the visiting ambassador curling up on a human diplomat's shoe. A human diplomat's vicious shoe. How can a shoe be vicious? I'm sure the Federation would drum up some evil intentions we have with our foot coverings. Obviously, we use it to harden our feet to kick prey animals, like this. Noah lightly batted his shoe against my ankle, amusement dancing in his eyes. Wait, I actually heard a story back at the embassy about someone throwing a shoe at a receptionist to distract security at a UN base. I don't know how true that was. You could have stopped with the first part, but you just have to correct your words, don't you? Accuracy is important. Science doesn't mess around with truth, my love. I wouldn't want anyone to say I omit unflattering aspects of the truth. I value my integrity. I value your integrity, and everything else about you, Noah Williams. You're the person who completes me, who gets me, and makes me feel like I am free to be happy again. I'm so glad the universe crossed our paths. I love you with all my heart. The human's binocular eyes fixed on me with intense focus. I love you too. Now, forever, and always. I'll love you to the heat death of the universe. I rested my head against the predator's sturdy chest, exhaling with contentment. All I'd hoped for in recent months was a peaceful future between us and humanity. While I couldn't work as fervently toward that on the political stage, events in my personal life could align toward that sincere goal. My passion could also be devoted to returning the Venlil to our roots, and finding out what we were without the Federation. The referendum looked like a lock to return our name to Skalga, which meant the public was on the same page. Maybe after Noah and I paved the way for a post-gene reversal life, others would follow. For the first time since my daughter's death, I felt that the best days of my personal life were ahead. Humanity's arrival was what gave me the chance to have a family again, freeing me from my ignorance and opening new doors into the future. I was grateful to have a partner who'd invested himself in my dreams, and morphed them into a joint effort that could give us a unique, wonderful opportunity. There was no telling what came next for us, but I was excited to see where the journey would lead. Memory transcription subject, Onso, Yodel Technical Specialist. Date, Standardized Human Time, March 24, 2137. After my wishing for the Kolshians to face steep retribution for everything they'd done to learn, it turned out there was no need to prompt humanity to begin bombing. The Duerden shield had been eager to obliterate anything housing life on Kato's surface. Watching the settlements vanish beneath a fiery glow, visible from space, did nothing to temper my rage. It didn't give me back the 20 years of my existence spent in a neurochemical haze, because I had predator disease. The Terrans seemed no more pleased than I was, and Sovlin's face showed a mixture of horror and concern. Chewing on his reaction for a few seconds, I believed the old Gojid was worried about how the humans would respond to the Duerden's bombing endeavor. Tyler had spelled out the UN's intentions to end the cycle of violence, and not to become like other murderous factions in our neck of galaxy. I respected the Terrans enough to heed their direction. Without the Earthlings' arrival, Lurn would still be overrun by Federation colonizers today. In my heart, I felt that the Kolshians needed to pay for the millions, billions of lives they genocide through their tenure. Yet a coldness gripped me as I realized how easy it was to kill an entire populace. This is what it means to wipe the Feds out once and for all, the reality I'd wished I could bring about. When Tyler said I think life means something, he wasn't wrong. This feels no better than watching all the things they did to us. The Duerden ships veered away from the surface, knowing the life-facilitating habitats weren't able to withstand a dose of antimatter. As if they'd never gone astray, the birds rejoined Terran and Sapient Coalition forces in cleaning up the last Kolshians in the systems. I forwarded a final target for us to pick off in a fog, still reeling from the suddenness of the bombing. My concerns regarding the Duerden had been about how effective they'd be in the thick of combat, but now, I was worried about how much they'd lash out due to their cornered animal mentality. It wasn't out of the question that they'd turn their guns on us within their rage, not dissimilar to how years of bottled anger led me to behave in explosive fashion at times. The humans needed to handle the situation delicately. I wasn't sure how the primates might go about getting us and the Duerden on the same page. As the last active foes by Kato were picked off, the Terrans decided it was an appropriate time to break our silence. I could see a brief discussion between our officers, as the rest of the crew moved ahead with battle plans as though nothing was wrong. Navigations pulled us closer to the herd-like cluster of Shield and Coalition vessels, and synced us with their vector toward Alpha itself, the prize of the system. Captain Monahan stood by her station, scowling at the viewport. "Hail the Duerden shield, yesterday. They're not going to launch an orbital raid over Alpha, especially not with our boots on the ground." "If I may, sir," I began, swiveling my ears toward Tyler, "the Sapient Coalition doesn't seem to have any objections over what the Duerden did to Kato. Your allies won't challenge you, but they think that bombing was justified." The blonde human pursed his lips. "We know they're angry about their entire lives and societies being a lie. I know that you're angry about them stomping out the Yodel spirit for decades. But those people had nothing to do with that, and that's a damn straight fact." "I know. It kind of hit me that everyone down there was just dead, in an instant. Even if the Kolshians deserve it, it's terrifying to be the arbiters of which civilizations live and which ones die. Humans don't want to set the precedent of who you chose not to save. When you stop believing your enemies are people, that opens the door to monstrous acts, Carlos agreed. Humanity is making a conscious choice to care about all life, even when it feels impossible to do so. Samantha snorted. All life. I don't see how we ever fix this authoritarian clusterfuck. Besides, I have as much sympathy for Kato as they had for Melbourne, which is 0. But since we saved their asses, the Duerden have no right to show up, circumvent our wishes, and give us the runaround. Well, they did, Sovlin grumbled. Ons, the atavist is right. Your allies agree with them, not you, and infighting would fuck us over. Tread carefully with that rebuke. Tyler heaved a weary sigh. Not my department. My job is to make sure whatever goes down, we keep an eye on it. We'll see what the captain says and provide support accordingly. Monahan's hail had gone unanswered for several minutes, a sign that the Duerden weren't eager to give humanity an account for their actions. I tried not to fixate on the outstanding call. Even if tensions erupted within our own ranks, it would still be vital for me to have a full picture of what was happening throughout the system. My gaze filtered down to the sensor screen, where I could gauge the success of our other group. Yodel technocracy ships and UN drones had kept pace with Ilthus, gunning into the asteroid belt. The Shadow Fleet had taken up positions there to utilize terrain to their advantage, and it seemed our Arxer allies had reenacted their reckless strategy from the gas giant. The chief hunter sacrificed thousands of his vessels again on a headlong charge. The particle beam-armed ships accompanying him were the ones who had the Commonwealth's number. The Arxer reinforcements were still afloat with about 15,000 ships, while the technocracy and UN top artillery were reigning supreme in this conflict. My team engaging the Kolshan's second-rate ships here allowed our heavy hitters to demolish their secret arsenal without distractions. When our forces joined up to storm Alpha, we'd make it a grueling challenge for the Federation to defend their core world. The enemy hadn't whittled us down along the way as much as they hoped. The only thing that could fuck this up is if we get into it with the Duerden, right before the final stage. We need unity, so I hope Monahan will be pragmatic. That's assuming the Shield answer. After several minutes of waiting, the same Duerden commander from earlier appeared. What is it you want, human? You said we can choose our role, and we chose what we came here for. Do we have a problem? Easy. I wish to coordinate our plans for taking Alpha, without using an intermediary. We're not enemies, so we need to be on the same page, Monahan said. For a predator, you show zero appreciation for a display of violence. Your SC friends tell me we're not on the same page, at all. And also, you let us take charge at Kato, just to bump us when we get to the main event? Nice try. Duerden Commander, this isn't a contest. This is about the fate of both of our people, and for that matter, all intelligent life in 1,000 light-year radius. I heard what you said about being angry, and coming here to dish out violence. I assure you that humanity understands, appreciates, and empathizes with your feelings. We know you're hurting, but I know we both agree that we have to win this battle. Us being divided or miscommunicating could spell disaster for our chances. We're not divided, unless you try to stop us from finishing the job. If you truly grasped how we feel about the billions of our own lying dead, there would be nothing to talk about. Don't pretend you aren't about to plead for us not to bomb those soulless bastards. I'm pleading for you to stay your explosives long enough for us to have a mutual discussion on what to do with Alpha. And most importantly, for humanity to head to the surface and gather information to ensure the Kolshans become a non-factor in the galaxy. Please, listen to my next words. We know very little about the Shadow Caste. We want to know their motives for starting this entire cycle of hatred, so we can have closure for Earth. If you're truly grateful for our help in saving Kalqua, you'll let us have that. The Duerden's beak parted in confusion. You'd go to all the trouble of landing, risking human lives, and merely delaying what we plan to do, for information on why they did it? It's beyond the why. The practical reason is one I think you'll agree with. Our lack of information on the shadow cast means we have no idea where they hid. It could be on another planet far off, perhaps even in a system belonging to you or one of your allies. It could be under the very oceans of Alpha, like the archives were. If we don't find out the truth, those bombs could miss the people who are undeniably responsible for what was done to you. We succeed by doing this by the book, and without letting our emotions cloud our judgment. Trust us to be predators, and hunt every Kolshan conspirator down. You will share your findings with us, and not omit anything for your own purposes? We are not the ones who hide our true intentions. I see no reason we can't work in harmony, to dig up any other dirty secrets the Kolshans might have that will threaten us all. What do you say? The gray avian was silent for long, brooding seconds. Assuming you can get unequivocal command of Alpha, I'll have my fleet hold their fire. If things go astray or it looks like we might be losing the fight, we're glassing as many cities on that blighted rock as we can. Then let's make sure we win, Monahan declared. Take care of yourself, Commander. I hope this is the start of better relations between our species. And I hope that you can find peace, someday. Humph. I hope that you find the closure you're looking for, human. Good luck. The Dururdan commander vanished from the screen, and our captain's face lit up with visible relief. Persuading the shield to let us land bought us some time, without worrying about the first bombs landing as our soldiers touched down. On a personal level, it allowed Tyler and I to accomplish the mission that brought us away from our easy assignments in the first place, finding out what the Kolshans had done to Slanik. Perhaps that mystery would overlap with the broad answers the United Nations was seeking out. Even when I felt certain that Alpha's glassing was the optimal outcome, I'd wanted to help my best friend first. With a temporary solution to our internal disagreements, that eliminated one hurdle to taking the Kolshan homeworld. I tried to wipe what happened on Kato from my mind, and focus on what was ahead of us. The entirety of the Terrans' efforts since first contact led to this moment. The Dururdan Shield and Sapient Coalition fanned out, while we maneuvered to the heart of the formation. Meanwhile, Yodel Technocracy, Terran drones, and Arxer allies took up angles from opposite headings. Our collection of ships was forming a net that encircled Alpha, merging into a cohesive unit that'd swallow the planet's defenses from all sides. I pivoted our viewport onto the luscious world, a series of faint violets and greens dotting the continents from native vegetation. City lights were more prolific on Alpha's form than the electric glimmers on Kato, while the oceans were unbroken swaths of blue. I couldn't rule out the possibility that the Shadow Fleet planted its cities beneath the waves, where no one would ever look. The Kolshan's Ectolan ancestors had aquatic origins, and as the Thafki proved, species who were drawn to water never truly lost that itch. Whatever secrets were hiding down there, we needed to steamroll the hundreds of thousands of Commonwealth ships above it to find them. Now was not the time for any missteps. Tyler cleared his throat. You see the planetary defenses on the lunar satellite? Those are gonna prevent us from getting close enough to Alpha for a landing or an airdrop, and they're gonna be a massive problem for our ships. It'll be a bloodbath to get a clean angle to take them all out from above, 'cause they got a fuck ton of outposts. We understand from the crew briefing, I replied. Secretary General Zhao's drawn comparisons to Normandy, an amphibious assault where, according to my research, one coalition stormed a desired target's beaches to take them over. We want to overrun the Kolshan planetary defenses and claim them for ourselves. Yes, precisely. If we can turn their own powerful lasers and ground-based artillery on the Shadow Fleet, it'll give us a massive boost. As an officer of this ship, I have no intention of volunteering for this mission. Infantry and security personnel have been assigned from our vessel, and many others. But if anyone does feel their skill set fits a job like this, I'm giving you the opportunity to join the landing party in the hangar bay. Fuck no, sir. I'm staying with you. Good. After the boarding incident, you're sticking with me whether you want to or not. That prompt was mainly directed at Harris and Romero. Samantha narrowed her eyes. What, because we're foot soldiers who got stuck being Baldy's watchdogs? Pretty sure that's why Officer Cardona asked us. We stormed the archives and that Arxer cattle ship, and we're the most qualified ones at this station, Carlos sighed. Qualified ones to pad the cannon fodder. Also able to shoot a gun and clear a building, unlike the Fed dies. You know what, fuck it, I'm in. Might be the only place the damn UN lets me shoot at those Kolshan dickwads. You're truly eloquent, Sam. Away with words. I'm going to get the job done. I don't hear you volunteering to leave this cozy ship. I'm in if you are, you absolute psycho. Let's gear up and head to the hangar. Sovlin swatted Carlos with the blunt side of his claws. Wait for me. None of you even asked me, after the three of us have been through several gunfights together. Whoa, I'm not sure that's a good idea, Tyler protested. Are you sure? It involves a space drop, you know, jumping out of this ship. Also a jump where you'll be far back enough to need the use of jet thrusters, till you're within lunar gravity range. What? You want to pull the crazy shit you did on the Cradle, but from space? And while dropping military rovers too. I'm glad you're getting the picture. So let's skip to the part where Baldy wimps out and says a tearful goodbye, Samantha interjected. Fuck you. I don't like the idea at all, but if you can do it, so can I. The Gojid's remaining spines bristled, tipping off his fear. Who flew the shuttle down to Silas, pushing it harrowingly close to its breaking point? Yeah, but you also freaked out when the aerosub started sinking on Tulsk. That was water. I don't know if you know this, Sam, but that's different from land. There's no water on the stupid hunk of rock there. As long as you're not crashing this moon into a planet, we're good. Tyler hesitated. You are qualified infantry, but aliens just don't have the training for orbital drops. However, if you want to hurl yourself into the line of fire, I won't stand in your way. Tag along with Harris and Romero if you're sure. Sure as can be. They're not getting rid of me. Pfft, great. Still stuck babysitting the war criminal with spikes that could poke my eyes out, Sam lamented, though I caught the teasing lilt in her voice. That's right, my remaining spikes could poke your ugly ass eyes out, so you better be nicer. Let's move. The trio vacated the bridge, leaving Tyler and I to man the sensor station during the crucial battle. When I proved myself more than capable of supplying tactical insight in Sovlin's absence, it would be difficult for the Gojid to use racist pejoratives toward my capabilities. I centered the viewport on the Kolshan and Dominion ships between us and the lunar satellite, while also setting my filters to watch for any planetary defense lasers vectoring toward us. Our goal was to get the infantry that would be storming the enemy fortifications as close to the target as possible. It was also preferable that they didn't deploy right in the middle of a plasma beam contest. I ran a hasty analysis on the makeup of the first ships we'd be facing. Pinpointing enemy weaknesses required knowledge of what we were up against. The Shadow Fleet had staked a massive claim within AFA's bounds, while the Dominion also had camped eye-popping numbers by the target. It was a little surprising that the Arxer captains had been dissuaded from dropping a few bombs on the Kolshans, with their cruelty-centric culture. Furthermore, of the hundreds of thousands of craft here for the final stand, very few were manned Commonwealth vessels. Most of the public military appeared to have been sacrificed along the route. Among the AFA-based ships marked as hostiles, very few appeared to be manned, sir, I informed Tyler. I will just bring your attention to the contacts designated civilian, standard evac transports. Out ahead of the front lines, and the only manned ships that I can see. The human nodded. How many souls aboard? Hundreds. No sign of weapons on board or anything anomalous. They are flying straight toward us, but we're also blocking all the ways out of the system. Assuming you don't want them blown up, you might want to direct the Durerton away from their flight path. Understood. I do wonder why they didn't evacuate civilians sooner. They've known we're coming for weeks. Sure, they're arrogant, but there had to have been some civvies who wanted to get out when they heard the flesh-eating predators were coming. I tilted my head in befuddlement. I do think some of the populace would have wanted to leave with advance warning. The only thing I can come up with is that they didn't tell them ahead of time. That is a reason. The squids sure do like keeping their control, and not giving people the option to leave, could be part arrogance and part tyranny. I dunno, but we ain't gonna shoot evac shuttles. The Durerton might want to. It was done to their civilians, trying to leave Calqua. They only agreed to spare Alpha so humanity could eradicate the shadow caste. I heard you, Onso. Plus, I get that those fuckers might have sent the evac ships up now, so we have to fight around the civvies to get to the military targets. I'll notify the captain, and we'll get our SC pals to quietly push the shield as far away from those transports as possible. Okay. I'll keep an eye on their path, so Weapons knows where they are. The blonde officer strode off to confer with Captain Monahan, while I mulled over the circumstances on the battlefield. Within the hour, we'd be squaring off for our first engagement near Offa. The civilian ships were an unwelcome variable, and the Terrans were too honorable to take them out of the equation. It was important to determine why the evac shuttles had been held back until now, before they complicated a testing battle even further. The humans hadn't expected the Kolshians to fight clean, so it was possible the hostiles meant to sacrifice their own non-combatants or use them as living shields. Solidifying our understanding of Offa's motives for this launch timing could be necessary to stave off any dirty tricks they had in mind. I hoped humanity wouldn't be forced to make the decision between innocence and victory, but I knew they were willing to do whatever it took to end the war. Memory transcription subject, Onso, Yodel Technical Specialist. Date, Standardized Human Time, March 24, 2137. Our fleet crested toward our waiting enemies, with the greatest tools and allies mankind had been able to assemble. As impressive as Earth's wartime innovations had been, it was their relentless pursuit of friends that we'd reaped the most rewards from so far. Having others to back us up made it possible to challenge a multitude of foes. The road to reach Offa's orbit hadn't been pretty, but war never was so beautiful or clean. The Terrans hadn't escaped entirely free from compromising their beliefs, or sacrificing lives they wished they didn't have to. Assuming we gained orbital control, I wasn't sure what we'd do about the Durerton's determination to glass this world. My grim realization was that humanity might have to bend their values again, with the Kolshians sending up civilian ships amid the battle. The evacuation shuttles hadn't lowered their thrusters, despite the oncoming onslaught. The United Nations hadn't fired on the transports, though we were in range to take the first ones out. I could see Weapons growing antsy the nearer they got. The Terran Allied fleet seeded a slight opening, altering our path enough to drift out of their way. With thousands of weaponless refugee vehicles coasting ahead, it was difficult to steer clear of all of them. I eyed the sensor readout, and noticed them sending power to directional thrusters. The evac shuttles might be trying to sidestep us, but if they're afraid enough of Terrans to leave, why would they trust them not to fire? My head snapped toward Tyler. Get Weapons to fire on those shuttles. They're hostiles. Hang on. What evidence do you have for that, Onso? The human asked, in a wary voice. I know you think they deserve to be wiped out, but the evidence is they're not acting afraid of you. None of them are flinching. My gut instinct says they're up to no good. The Kolshians have a better understanding of what's the truth about us. They might know our code of ethics against shooting civilians. The Shadow Caste knows, but the average citizen doesn't. That means the secret fleet must be piloting those shuttles. It's the only thing that explains their behavior. Sensors would know if they're hiding weapons, so that, no. My God. Captain Monahan frowned, having overheard our exchange. That's a bold assumption, but it has the ring of truth to it. Weapons, patch us in with our allies. Advise them to hold their fire, but shoot any transports that draw too close. As comms fired off a hasty communique and I passed along the nearest shuttle for weapons to target, the speediest Kolshan transport swerved at a UN drone. The automated vessel was programmed not to shoot at civilian targets without authorization or clear hostile activity. When the evac ship rammed into our unpiloted vehicle full speed, it smoked through its hull. Both spacecraft were shattered in the collision. Hundreds of life signatures from within the shuttle vanished in an instant, strewn to cosmic dust. On the thousands of ships carrying refugees, similar passenger counts showed on my readout. Given the lack of panicked movement within the interiors, I assumed they had no idea what their fate was going to be. The civilian vessels turned on the first Terran ships they could encounter, with several hundred crashing before we'd reacted to the unthinkable. I could feel a knot of horror in my stomach, as I realized how little the Commonwealth thought of the lives of their own people. While humanity chose to care about all life in the galaxy, the Kolshans cared for none. Those civilians had been loaded onto the shuttles without a clue to their fate, with the promise of escaping the system. The Shadow Fleet knew we wouldn't shoot a genuine transport down, and conned hundreds of thousands of their citizens into climbing aboard to make it believable. They waited to start evacuations until the last minute, because they intended to use innocent lives as a weapon. How will they ever explain this to their people? How do military commanders, at least the ones from the public fleet, have no gripe with this strategy? Captain Monahan's teeth were bared with contempt. Shoot down every one of those transports. And censors, from now on, don't mark any Kolshan ships as non-combatants. Understood, ma'am. I applied filters to label anything with a Kolshan warp signature as hostile. If there were any innocents, their government's deranged actions had revoked their right to protection. The transports are shown as hostiles now. I've left a new class indicator to reflect their unarmed status, so weapons can fully assess our priorities. Good work, Onso, Tyler grumbled, though his gaze was far off, struggling to process such a senseless gambit of civilian lives. You were right. After what they've done to entire planets, I guess this shouldn't surprise me. This time, it's not just them letting it happen, like they did with the Thafki, or the attacks on Nishtal and the Cradle. This is intentionally and knowingly sending civilians to their deaths. How did they sell this to the people outside of the conspiracy? If I know one thing about the Federation, it's that they love to blame predators for anything they have to do. Better dead than cattle. What's the sacrifice of a few thousand people, if it saves the herd? Yet our empathy is what's under a microscope. That's a bad fucking punchline, huh? It's not a punchline if it's not the least bit funny. It ain't funny, but it sure is a joke. We coulda had hundreds of friends if the Federation didn't exist. I'd sure like to have seen what kinda shake we woulda gotten. Like it's a wonderful life, except that it's a good thing they weren't around. Once again, I don't understand a word you're saying. That's how I feel with you and your science words. Forget my movie references, and put that big brain of yours to work. We gotta get Baldy and company within range of the moon. I'm working on it. We're needing to pass through the Shadow Fleet wall ahead, slated to make contact in a few minutes. After we clear out the civilian transports. The human nodded. Eyes on the Dominion's main activities. They're on the offensive. Gunning for the Shield and the SC when they can, since they get off on hunting prey, but I don't think that's our primary concern. It's not. Keep at it, buddy. The Terran warships sliced through the remaining transports like putty. The shuttle's lack of shields or armor allowed them to be downed with relative ease. The Kolshan's ghastly trick had taken out a few hundred ships before the first shots rang out, but I knew our true casualties would surface once we engaged the enormous armada. I angled the viewport toward the moon where the planetary defenses sat, which was doling out carnage with any lasers that landed. It was difficult to imagine Sovlin in a vac suit, traipsing around. The rovers dropping to the ground were the only way he'd keep up with the Persistence Predator's trek. Their mission could entail heavy resistance, so the more we could simplify the landing process, the better. While our manned ships were pigeonholed into closing on the moon, in order to unload infantry, other contests were being waged across the planet's breadth. Flashes of orange and white, signifying explosions and plasma respectively, detonated above the world's entire circumference. Speedy UN drones on this side of Alpha were targeted by the planetary defenses from afar. Meanwhile, from the globe's opposite half, missiles blazed into space from the depths of the ocean. It lent credence to the theory that the Kolshians had constructions within abyssal waters. These warheads appeared to be nuclear-armed, and their ability to escape the atmosphere and find targeting was an impressive feat of engineering. I'm sure they didn't stuff those missiles onto one side of the planet's oceans and not the other. I'll stay vigilant for anything at the atmospheric fringes on our side. We don't want to get blindsided by nukes. The Terrans had a better capacity to thwart the ballistic missiles lobbed at singular ships, although such mighty munitions packed a forceful punch even if they were stopped short of the target. The Yodel technocracy also possessed particle beams that could slice through a warhead's arming mechanisms. However, Chief Hunter Ilthus' craft got walloped by the influx of nuclear weapons. It was clear the Dominion ships had been ordered to pay no mind to defense. What was fortunate was that the Sapient Coalition and Durerton Shield were kept on our side of the globe, or else they might have fallen victim just like Ilthus had. Our Dominion allies were reduced to a small remaining force, cutting off one source of manpower. Sir, and no, I said it's not our primary concern, but I don't think we want our herbivorous allies to take a shellacking like Ilthus, I remarked. Can they handle Arxer fighting them one-on-one, or two-on-one? Tyler bobbed his shoulders. I doubt it, but we can't worry about that until the planetary defenses are offline. Hopefully the Greys aren't ready for prey to actually fight back. The Durerton are out for blood, so hopefully that compensates for their lack of tactics. I suppose they're lucky they're fighting Arxer, not Shadow Fleet ships. We're the ones who are pitted up against the biggest threat, and the sole path to the moon is through them. The human tapped a marked radius of space. I input the region we need to get to for troop deployment, per the mission parameters. Worry about finding us the best route, and keeping us apprised of any threats. Might be a bumpy ride, you know. Understood. I also know we want to be as close as possible, so I'll look for anything that helps us gain ground. Our warships were joined by some UN drone support, since our manned vessels were at a disadvantage against Kolshian automatons. The lasers on the moon amped up their firing speed, putting an exclusive focus on our newest and strongest craft. Outdated crewed vehicles were neglected altogether. The amount of power that could be funneled through the lunar installment was astounding. Similar to how humans moved their nuclear arsenal to Luna, the Commonwealth had stationed some of their high-yield explosives on the natural satellite. That kept them closer to the action in the event of a raid, rather than buried in the ocean. Our flight path wasn't dissimilar to Calsim's en route to Earth. I wondered if the Kolshians had taken notes from that clash. It didn't seem the Shadow Fleet had grasped our intentions, since they were regarding the UN drones as the greatest threat. Our highest concentrations of automatons found shield breakers deposited in their midst, and were tag-teamed by ship weapons and planetary defenses. Manned Terran vessels were able to cruise forward with minimal fire trained on us. Thousands of soldier-toting friendlies sailed toward the arbitrary boundary where our troops could deploy. It was only as we neared the skirmish line that our foes rounded on us, and plasma began zipping our way. I could see debris littering the edges of the viewport, a telltale sign of why thousands of our drones had vanished from sensors. If our finest vessels are getting mowed down by these planetary defenses, I see why we need to capture or eliminate the infrastructure. Imagine how the Durerton Shield would fare against weapons of this kind. This must be why the Kolshians thought Alpha was impenetrable. Navigations yanked our ship to one side, turning our casual glide into a spiral to avoid plasma. Shields blinked out on my readout, with the Shadow Fleet having ample shield busters in reserve to handle us. I pinpointed a Kolshan automaton for weapon targeting, but its algorithms were one step ahead of our hastily deployed shot. The beam fell wide by a large margin. Charging ahead against superior craft wasn't ideal, yet the threshold we needed to reach sat behind these vessels. Our own drones had to break free from their predicament and give us an assist, or we were going to end up in multiple pieces. I could see several manned craft flanking us reduced to tattered husks. I traced a vector toward a marginal opening in their ranks. This is the best opening I can find, but it takes us within their direct line of fire. My suggested strategy would be to set up barriers and hunker down, except that time is of the essence. The Kolshans will close the gap as soon as we make a run for it, won't they? Tyler sighed. Obviously. They don't know our true plans, but they don't want anyone getting in range of the planetary defenses. Hell, even if we get past them, we'll have lasers and nukes from that moon thrown in our face. Need to launch the troops and get out fast. Why haven't they used those nukes? Probably going to wait to launch them, in the event we get past their line. They don't want the Shadow Fleet caught up in the blast radius. Layers of defense. So we need a distraction. We've got a few spacecraft carriers, time for them to open their bellies and pester the squids with some fighters. Back where it all began. I twitched my ears. It's a start, but we need more. If we have any antimatter bombs left after the gas giant fight, I think it's time to use them against singular ships. It'll punch an opening and give us a moment to break through. We do got some leftover warheads. Don't got any intention of dropping those on Alpha, especially after Monahan's little chat, so throwing M in the Kolshan's face sounds fantabulous to me. I'll bring the captain in the loop. I locked in the optimal vector for our navigations, before offering a second set of targets that needed to be displaced. On the viewport, munitions whizzed past us, standard combat missiles were locked on Terran ships by the thousands. Weapons was working overtime to strike the explosives down before they reached us, though one rammed straight into our nose. Without shields, it blew off a large chunk of our underbelly, though thankfully, it was shy of the hangar where our troopers were congregated. We were fortunate the hull integrity held together, and that the fissures in our armor plating were not spreading throughout the vessel. Non-critical hit. Might lessen the power we can route to the railgun, but it could be much worse. We don't want to get hit by anything else lobbed our way. Tyler gave me a nod as he returned from the captain's station, signaling her approval of my plan. Com sent out the call for fighter support. It was rare to utilize such massive munitions in fleet confrontations, since their design was tailored to targeting sprawling regions from orbit. We prepared to divert all power to thrusters. There would be a single chance to make a break for it, assuming our plan worked. I watched as we bore down on the Kolshans, with some level of concern for our safety. Inertial dampeners were suffering the occasional lapse, pushed to the hardware's limits by our erratic maneuvers. The disadvantage of having biological life on board was that we couldn't take severe evasion actions like drones without killing the occupants. I could see the bubble of space nearing on sensors, but despite the strategic advantage, I wasn't going to suggest we push deeper to give our friends a better launch point. It would already be perilous to get their jetpacks in range at all. Fighters slingshot out into space from our behemoth carriers, who lurked at the back of the pack. That was step one of the distraction, as nimble UN frames weaved up close and nipped at the Kolshan's heels. Our bombing classes were preparing the deployment of antimatter weapons, ready to forcefully vacate the enemy from this patch of space. Humanity was too stubborn to turn back. We were pushing through to the target destination, here and now. Plasma clipped the already damaged part of our ship, as our jerky movements failed to skirt a close-range beam entirely. I moved closer to Tyler on instinct, drawing strength from having my buddy at my side. We'd always known that deploying to Alpha was a risk, but standing by him was worth sacrificing the idyllic future that beckoned to me on Lern. If those antimatter bombs didn't get out of Allied bays soon, we were going to be lit up like a sacrifice to Ralki. Kinetics raked across the front of our ship, mauling us even further. Navigation was overloaded with new threats, desperately dipping down and throwing out interceptors. There was no time to get our bearings and counter the inbound munitions, as we felt the ship rattle from impact after impact. "Hey, Tyler," I hissed. "If this is the last thing I say, I've got 3 words picked out. Fuck the Federation." The blonde human ruffled my forehead fur, earning a hiss from me. "Damn straight, but I don't plan on dying none. We gotta rescue Slanik," promised Marcel. "Onward and upward." My quizzical look intensified, as I questioned whether that exclamation was in reference to hot air balloons. There were worse things to die thinking about than Terran flight devices, and the technical chain of events that led them to the natural development of starships. A lot of people would have sought something more meaningful to dwell on, but I want to go out fantasizing about what I loved. The red dots on the screen, indicating threats, faded into the background. I waited for the inevitable, even as the primates fought tooth and nail to press ahead. Instead of getting bulldozed by 2 plasma beams, our warship managed to turn on its axis. We glided between 2 searing arcs that were meant to ensnare us. My optimism for our prospects lifted ever so slightly, as the antimatter bombs began to unload from across our fleet. Hostile drones balked with city-leveling munitions incoming, and tried to maneuver out of the way. Their plan was to let each missile sail past, where it would be locked onto nothing and could be disabled at their leisure. However, another wave of human warheads chased them along their evacuation route, forcing them to widen the gap further. A third volley kept them back so we could pass unassailed, like wild beasts being fended off by a waving torch. The antimatter did connect with a handful of enemy targets, mainly those who'd lost mobility earlier in the battle. Massive levels of energy were thrown out from the epicenter, and I had to hurriedly account for a plane of shrapnel which was generated in our path. The edge of the launch point was a few seconds out, so Sovlin, Carlos, and Sam could leap to the moon if we got a little further. UN fighters and drones mobilized in a circle around us, standing between the manned vessels and the Shadow Fleet. They were taking the brunt of the barrage, buying precious seconds, which must have tipped off the Kolshians to our importance. However, it was too late for the Shadow Fleet to stop us from executing our plans. The region where we were cleared to space drop troops flashed green, as the sensor dot for our warship poked its nose across the boundary. Without an instant's hesitation, the hangar bay was flung open, and human soldiers leapt from the safety of our vessel to get boots on the lunar ground. Memory transcription subject, Captain Sovlin, United Nations Fleet Command. Date, Standardized Human Time, March 24, 2137. The humans had really done it. The deranged predators strapped themselves into multi-layered spacesuits, and leapt straight into space. I wasn't sure what compelled my stout legs to follow their lead, but here I was, coasting alongside Carlos and Sam with no way back. The jet pack alongside my oxygen gave me a small push toward the lunar surface, with its flight computer having been programmed with my mass and height differential in mind. My claws wrapped around my rifle, which was tethered to my chest. The last thing I needed was for my weapon to float away. I wasn't fully convinced we'd survive this stunt. Assuming we did, a single bullet which made it through or around the suit's armor plates would expose us to the vacuum. It was absolute lunacy, though it was made worse by the fact they'd slingshot military rovers, of massive size and with gigantic guns, toward the moon atop thruster stages. It didn't seem possible for it not to break apart when it struck the ground, without a true engine tacked onto it. That was our likeliest fate too. It seemed idyllic floating through space now, but hurtling toward the cratered, slate-colored surface would be terrifying. Did humans lack cognizance of falling or heights? Why had I agreed to go with them, just to prove myself to these should-be predator disease inmates? The good news was a ship sniping lifeforms in the breadth of space was almost as difficult as nailing a nano-drone. We were microbes to a Shadow Fleet weapons station. That rendered the odds of us getting cooked by plasma low, though not zero. I cast a glimpse back at our warship, in time to see it making a hurried retreat from the planetary defenses. UN drones were fighting the Kolshians tooth and claw, but the enemies were easily sealing the temporary gap formed by our bombs. There was no telling whether our friends would survive the battle that raged overhead, as we careened toward the satellite's pull. The planetary defenses had to be disabled, if we wanted the rest of the crew to have a fighting chance. "Sam, are you sure this is safe?" I asked over the comms link. The human's irate expression was something I could imagine beneath her helmet. Need a diaper change, Sovlin?" "Fuck you. I'd like a realistic idea of our chances." "Well, even if you pass out like a scaredy cat, the pack's automated. It calculated the best route with its fuel reserves. We did a small-scale test of the tech on Luna, but it's pretty new. Even if it does orient us in the right direction on an alien world, when our measurements rely on trustworthy as fuck fed science, it's up to you to land on your feet and haul ass." Carlos patched into our helmet link. "Thankfully, you'll only have to hoof it to the nearest rover. If the trajectory is on point, our ride will be a few hundred feet away. From there, we got some big guns, and a little more padding between us and a stray bullet." "You have armed ground vehicles specifically for moons? And for harsh terrain planets like Kato or Mars?" UN's had these bad boys out on Mars, mostly for search and rescue, but also in case any security action was needed. "Dunno why they don't use tank treads, you could ask Onso, if you wanted to know." "Bah, I bet that primitive read all the answers in a book somewhere. I could do that too." Sam snorted. "Then why don't you?" "I'm busy. Currently dropping onto a moon with just a jet pack, for example. But I'm not establishing contact with that joke of an engineer until we need to patch ourselves back into the ship. All they need to know is when the planetary defenses are under our control, and we need a ride out. UN Command will be in touch with our ground leaders the whole way through. We only need to phone home once we want off this barren rock." "How will the fleet know if we fail?" "The installation will blow up," Carlos answered in a voice that had too much levity. "Giant fireball, base gone. Quite visible." I flailed within my spacesuit. "What?" "Yep. I thought you listened in the briefing. Each installation across the lunar surface, including the one we're raiding, has a self-destruct function so that it doesn't fall out of their control. However, it requires authorization keys from 2 individuals. They'll want the planetary defenses in the space fight as long as possible, so they'll be standing by the receptacle until their base is about to fall. The part one did listen to was the part where we still plan to storm their safe house. Do you warmonger apes like complexes blowing up in your face? We prefer not getting immolated in giant explosions. Thanks for asking, Sam chirped. The lunar surface was enhancing in detail, and I could feel gravity playing a hand in my acceleration. The uptick in apparent velocity caused my stomach to churn, which made me desperate for the humans to keep talking as a distraction. My claws wanted to uncurl from the gun. Instinctive panic told me I was about to die. The predators crossed their arms in front of their chests as they hurtled toward solid ground. Unfortunately, the more I heard about this plan, the less comforting I found their growling voices. The fact that they knew the base was prepped to detonate as soon as we got close suggested this was a suicide mission. What if the humans are sacrificing us to get the planetary defenses destroyed, the way the Kolshians sent civilians to their deaths on those evac shuttles? How can clever predators like my guards not see this as a death sentence? I'm willing to die for what I've done, but I would have liked to have been told up front. I'd still do it so Earth can survive. For that debt I'll always owe you, but I don't love the idea of getting blown to bits. I hissed. Carlos' sigh was audible within my helmet. As I was saying, the 2 authorized Kolshians will need to stand by to initiate the self-destruct. Makes them a sitting target. Snipers take out one of them, and make sure no one else grabs the key. Our job will be to clear the facility, and assume control of the command center. You left out the part of the job where we compete for the highest kill count of Kolshan asswipes, Samantha interjected. Oh, and Carlos, Baldy's definitely thinking he should have stayed with Onso. The yodel was the smart one, sitting in front of a bloody screen. I do hope that nothing happens to that Taushana, I remarked, mischievously checking whether the humans knew that word. That didn't translate. What's Taushana mean? It's a loving term of affection. Onso asked to be called that instead of primitive. I don't fucking trust you. I'm being serious. If anything happens to me, tell him Sovlin was proud to work alongside such a bright-eyed Taushana. That almost sounds nice. It is nice. I promise, Taushana holds a special place in the Yodel language, especially in Rinsa. Onso and you battle bonded, so it'd mean a lot from you, Sam. I'll consider it. I do respect that wise-ass firecracker. He's alright for. The rest of Samantha's slanted compliment eluded my comprehension. My focus was ripped back to my trajectory, once retro thrusters kicked in to slow my fall. With conversation failing to distract me, I noticed why boost power was kicking in. We were close enough to the ground that it was time to tap the brakes. My personal propulsion warred with gravity, yet gravity seemed to be winning. What spikes I had struggled against their bindings underneath the back of my suit. This free-falling sensation wasn't anything that Gojids evolved to withstand, and my head was spinning from the rapidity of it all. Fear throttled my heart without any reprieve, threatening to strip me of my faculties. The lunar surface expanded within my periphery, like it was being magnified across a viewport. Craters that looked like tiny divots from afar were becoming gaping basins. A few miles from our landing site, the planetary defense complex was taking on a three-dimensional appearance at last. My brain weighed the cumulative stimuli, and proclaimed my death was imminent. I couldn't imagine how the Terran troopers who airdropped onto the cradle felt, on a planet with full gravity that well exceeded this moon's attraction. Predators were built differently from us, but humans were a fearless breed even among hunters. I was certain the Arxer wouldn't tackle such daunting heights. Does that make me braver than the Greys? That thought almost gives me the willpower to keep my wits. Besides, it's not like I can undo the fact I jumped out of a spaceship with suicidal primates at this point. Fuck. I screamed into the comms. Where is the fabric overhang you had on the cradle? Did you crazy, insufferable predators forget that? Carlos' chuckle sounded too carefree. Oh, this is better than normal skydiving. So gentle and tranquil, I'd do this for fun. The adrenaline, Sovlin. Don't you feel alive? I feel like I want to know where the gliding tarp is. We need to slow the fuck down. Well, a parachute would be useless. There's no air in space for it to catch on. Duh. You don't have to be Onso to understand basic facts, Sam jabbed. Gulped down the oxygen circulating within my suit, leaving myself a mental reminder to purposefully have Sam run into my spines if I ever had the option again. Those mind-warped humans had no right to poke fun at how petrifying this was. My body careened through hundreds of feet of altitude in a short span, while the boost pack's vibrations chipped in with more insistence. It was only when the ground was a skyscraper's length away that it slowed me to a leaf's glide. I floated on a bubble of air, placed down with a gentle touch. My feet pressed onto the lunar surface, with less force than if I was hopping out of bed. The predators touched down without issue as well, slowly lowered to the ground in tiny increments. The perfect calculation of the jet pack's computer was remarkable. I was beyond grateful to have my legs on solid ground. Now, it was time to get moving toward the complex that could be detonated in our face at any moment. Across the surface of the moon, other groups would be storming similar installations without pausing for respite. Carlos checked the HUD within his helmet, before pointing toward a rover that had plopped down to the moon with elegance. It was awkward to run in my space suit under the low gravity, especially since the predators could maintain their pace with a light skip. I found extra energy for my legs as a rocket landed just shy of our position. The Kolshians had spotted us. It's going to be a long few minutes driving toward the base. Thankfully, I don't think they have a large supply of missiles on hand, but they will be shooting at us the whole way. My lungs and core burned as we neared the rover, though I forced myself to press onward. Samantha ducked behind the wheel of the vehicle, while Carlos ushered me into the back compartment. As soon as we were inside, I collapsed from exhaustion. It would take a few minutes to catch my breath. The male guard took a brief look at me, before popping open a hatch on the vehicle. The human hoisted himself up behind a machine gun fixed to the top, just enough that his head poked out of the rover. His gloved hands turned the turret in all directions, and searched for targets. Samantha finished plugging in the coordinates, before turning to face me. "Sovlin, you're gonna be the loader. You see those ammo boxes? Load them into the main gun, and don't fuck it up." I pushed myself to my feet and studied the task at paw. "Yeah, I can do that. We don't use ground vehicles too often in the Federation, nothing like these, but I've seen a few during Arxer raids. It won't be a problem." "Better not be, or you're walking to the base." The rover was rolling ahead toward the Kolshian installation, and without sound in space, it was impossible to gauge when we were being fired at. I could see Carlos firing off rounds at targets, but I decided to keep to my lane and help him reload. It was the human's role to survey the battlefield, and assess hostile activities. Hopefully, the vehicle's armor could absorb kinetics sent off by Kolshians who saw us coming. An army of military space rovers, dropped from the sky, plowing across the cratered surface. We were impossible to miss. Perhaps it was better that I wasn't relegated to the stressful role of gunner, requiring myself to be exposed to anything sailing through the area. Samantha, as the driver, wasn't content without a view of the action. The rover lacked a windshield like I'd expect from exploration vehicles, but it seemed to have a periscope she could peer out of. I kept to my dutiful task, refraining from asking questions about our progress. Minutes of sightless transit had me uncertain how much further we had to press on to our destination. From the way Carlos' legs had tensed up, we were receiving heavier amounts of fire. I knew that meant we had to be getting close, though none of us would exit the vehicle until we were on their doorstep. There was no telling whether UN snipers had been successful in eliminating the self-destruct keyholders. I guess we'll find out by whether the base goes boom as we bust into the command center. Let's not think about that. I'll assume we get control of those stupid lasers, and then my knowledge from defending the cradle might come in handy for how to use them. Carlos continued to dish out bursts of fire, while helping Samantha keep an eye out for traps. The two humans communicated information only when it was necessary, otherwise preferring to fixate on our life-or-death circumstances. I was impressed as always by their efficiency and composure under extreme peril. The Terran's confidence rubbed off on me a little, despite how insane this mission was. There weren't enough Kolshian foot soldiers defending the base to hold us back, as long as we could absorb an influx of fire a little longer. The rover appeared to have built-in systems that could mess with missiles' homing systems, or destroy them in flight. Explosives were the greatest threat to us in transit, and they could be neutralized. The incredible machinations crafted by these predators might be enough to get us to our destination in one piece. I couldn't help but give a satisfied grunt, knowing how the tide of the space battle might turn if we gained control of the planetary defenses. Such powerful weapons were a nightmare for the UN Armada to deal with, something that could smite our most advanced spacecraft in one hit. Without these installations, the Shadow Fleet would be ill-equipped against our particle beams, nano-drones, and other superior munitions. I decided to break my silence for a quick word of encouragement to Carlos. I wanted to share the triumphant feeling coursing through my veins with the guard who'd always given moral guidance of the highest integrity, the one who believed in a brighter future, and tried to understand what drove me from the beginning. However, as my gaze turned to the predator to weigh his demeanor, I saw a sudden spasm pass through his form. His head made a quiet snap backward in the hatch, and his hands slipped off of the turret. The human's legs crumpled underneath his bulky form, as if a rug was yanked from under him. Panic raced through my heart. Realizing what had happened, I rushed to his side, and kneeled over his downed form. Samantha also whipped around in the driver's seat, yelling Carlos' name through our comms link, to no response. My eyes peered at the bullet hole through the front of his spacesuit helmet, exposing the human to the vacuum, and the crimson blood bubbling at the cracked edges. Horror took over my consciousness as I scrambled for a way to keep the kind-hearted predator alive.